Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Truth Wanted. I am your host, as always, Objectively Dan. And what do you think of that new intro music, y'all? That's pretty smooth. I picked that out myself. I think I like that a lot. I think we're going to keep using it. You tell me down in the comments and stuff if we're going to do that. I don't know. But this is Truth Wanted. This is the show where we talk to people live every Friday at 7 about what they believe and why. Joining me this week is a friend of mine, a really, really great content creator on YouTube. I've been following his stuff since I was still a believer. This is the one and only Paulogia. Paul, what is going on, my friend?
Happy to be here. It's exciting time in Canada. It's the snow's melting. We're excited. I know in Dallas, you guys don't worry about that. But.
Yeah, and I hear you're down. You're down with the sickness tonight. Is that true?
I am. So if you hear me sniffling and sneezing, nothing personal. But fortunately, you can't catch it from where I am.
That's awesome. Well, in case you're not aware of Paul, let me help you get out of that rock that you've been hiding under, because Paul has been. I mean, he kills it, man. He talks about a whole bunch of stuff, especially if you're into talking about religious topics in general. I mean, he talks about young earth creationism. He's talking about the historicity of the Bible. I've heard him talking about theology stuff. Paul was actually a former Christian himself, and now talks about this stuff on YouTube. And he just makes such good stuff. I think tonight we kind of wanted to focus a bit on kind of young earth creationism, because that's not really something we've talked a whole lot about on this show. And I was just kind of wondering, Paul, if you could just kind of give me your kind of journey with that and what that term even means for those who aren't aware.
Sure. I mean, young earth creationism is a broad, like anything in Christianity, of course, ask any two Christians that are going to disagree on what it really means. But young earth creationism typically is the belief that the earth is less than 10,000 years old, because back in the 1500s or so, Bishop James Ussher decided that he was going to add up all the chronologies in the Bible, and that came to about 6,000 years. So then everyone decided that's how old the earth has to be, because the Bible is right about everything, literally. So these are the people who believe that creation week happened exactly as it said, that plants were created before the sun, because that makes a lot of sense. All those kind of things. So if the poster children for these would be, Ken Ham, Eric Hovind, Kent Hovind, those kind of people. And I used to be one of them. I was a Mennonite, and I used to hold that the earth was young, and that dinosaurs lived up until recently and were on Noah's Ark and all that kind of good stuff. Of course, many Christians have other beliefs. There's old earth creationism, and there's theistic evolution. There's a lot of different views. So I'm not trying to attempt to say that any one view is representative of Christianity, but young earth creationism is that sort of fundamentalist view that I held.
Yeah, so this is interesting because, I mean, this view, as far as you and I both know, just doesn't hold up to a lot of scientific scrutiny. I mean, obviously, you've talked about this a lot on your channel, and it's not essential to all, Christianity. I actually hear a lot of atheists who kind of make fun of this worldview and stuff, but really, it's just a segment of the whole Christian population that really has this as a view. I know, like, Catholics, for example, don't really espouse this as a belief of theirs, and a lot of Protestant sects, including, I grew up in the Methodist Church, and that wasn't really something that we really talked about at all. And I remember the first time I was really kind of encountering these views when I was a kid, I was just kind of, I don't know, I guess I was just a little bit confused, because I had always heard that dinosaurs were like millions and millions of years old, and these other people were saying this other thing. And I mean, how do you think this whole thing got started, and why do you think it's so popular?
Well,
I mean, you kind of explained kind of the history of it a little bit, but like,
sure.
Like was it always kind of a view that Christianity has had, or was this kind of more developed over time?
Well, Christianity there's almost nothing that all of Christianity holds. So this is very distinctly as you mentioned, it's a Protestant thing. Mm-hmm. And depending on which Christian you listen to, some Christians will tell you that all the early church fathers believed in young earth creationism. Catholics will tell you that none of them did. But it gained popularity in North America. The version that is most popular now, like the Answers in Genesis version, started, say, in the 50s, and goes back to this idea that the Bible is inerrant. And so if you want to hold in your heart that the Bible is inerrant, you have to believe in virgin births, talking donkeys, and, the number of years that the Bible
Mm-hmm.
says. So it has to go with, for me, it always at least was, the doctrines of inerrancy are tied up in it. And Ken Ham will often say it's all, his ministry is a scriptural authority ministry. That if you reject a literal Adam and Eve and you reject that story, that why not just reject it all?
Mm.
And actually, that's my story. So once I figured out, some of you may know that I had a career in the film industry and in the comic book industry, and I was writing a graphic novel that had to do with dinosaurs. And since I was a young Earth creationist, I thought, well, I should at least research what some of the secular people, what the terrible, awful secular people think dinosaurs. And as I started to look at it, it started to actually make a lot of sense. And for me, once the truth of old Earth and evolution, all that kind of stuff, stepped in, and I had to accept it, then I actually had to go back and look at my whole faith from scratch.
Mm.
And that's when I started seeing, man, Jesus believed in a literal Adam and Eve. From the way I read the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus and Paul, the apostle, both believed in literal Adam and Eve. So if I can't believe in them anymore, can I believe in Jesus? And I know that's what the young Earth creationists are afraid of, is that if you start taking any of it figuratively, maybe you'll just throw out the whole thing. So that's partially why some people defend it so strongly, is because they want to hold on to it all. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, because it's something I feel like that has to be almost home brewed at this point, at least in this day and age, because there's so much scientific information out there that seems to at least tell a different story and say, as far as evolution, as far as the history of geological sciences, as far as like astronomy and stuff. And I mean, we could talk about these kinds of topics all day, but like, it seems to me that the only people who believe in like a young Earth model are people who also have this religious belief. It's not like there's secular people that are also believing that the Earth is kind of taking this young form. It kind of seems like it's almost a package deal, which is really kind of interesting. Obviously lots of religions have their own kind of cosmological models and so forth. But it wasn't really required for my Christian faith, which is something that was, kind of an interesting perspective. Like you said, there's theistic evolution and all kinds of stuff. So it's kind of interesting to compare and contrast these ideas, especially as someone who didn't grow up with that, who doesn't have that as part of my story. What do you think was the reason that really, I mean, like you said you did your research and stuff, but if like for someone like me who didn't have those kinds of beliefs, do you think it's important to talk about? Because, let me frame it this way, because I was talking to somebody earlier this week about young Earth creationism, and we had an interesting conversation of like, well, it doesn't actually, their perspective was, it doesn't really matter if these people kind of have these beliefs. They're just talking about history. They're just talking about this other stuff. In the modern day, it doesn't seem to really influence or inform people's actions or how they're going to inform, I guess their general policies. I think I had some disagreements with that, but I wanted to get your specific take on this kind of idea.
Well, so if you don't care so much about what someone's belief is necessarily, and I would call myself an anti-theist. I actually would think that we would all be better off. The world in general would be better off with less religion. But if you want to just look at that young Earth creationist element of it, the problem with that is, in order to enforce that with their congregations, they have to undermine science in general. And so that's what they will do. They'll say that general scientific methods by which we know things are unreliable. And what that leads to is then young Earth creationists, by proxy, disregarding science of all kinds. So that's why you see so many fundamentalists rejecting climate change, for example, or becoming anti-vaxxers, or even going so far as to becoming flat earthers. Now, the last flat earthers, whatever, you can argue, maybe that's not affecting someone, but it leads you to just bad thinking and bad conclusions. And the problem is that these people are voters, as you know, and that when the people who vote you into office don't accept science, then you will make policies to appease them that also ignore science. And it's just a danger in general for people not to think critically. And in order to be a young Earth creationist, you have to abandoned to some extent critical thinking. And so for me, that is part of why I try and teach. I don't try and just say in my videos why this is wrong. I try to talk to myself. Just a few years ago, I tried to talk to younger Paul and say, hey, here's the steps by which you should probably come to the realization yourself that this isn't a good point. I'm more trying to get some of that critical thinking going, because if you are just accepting authority straight up, which is what my church was all about, it was just authority, top down, whatever you're told is what it is. Then that's the kind of thinking you're going to carry over into other areas of your life that are perhaps more impactful to society. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to remind folks real quick that we are live and we're going to take calls here in a second. So if you want to talk to me or Paul, the number is 512-686-0279. Please go ahead and call. For those of you who are listening live, we have some lines open. That makes a lot of sense to me, the way that you're describing it. My encounters with these kinds of worldviews, especially with young earth creationism, is they care a lot about authority and who is telling the facts. Is it the scientists telling the facts, or is it like the Bible or Jesus that's telling these, facts, or whatever you want to call them? And that's really interesting to me because I had that kind of view myself when growing up. It was like, oh, yeah, the Bible definitely is an authority in my life. It's informing my worldview on things. But I guess depending on what kind of Christian you are, the authority of the Bible kind of your mileage may vary on how much it actually dictates. And it's funny to me because it's almost as if the ones who are following the most closely are also kind of in this young earth creationist camp, who are like really studying this stuff and really trying to, make some sort of interpretations out of it. I mean, some might argue, I don't know if I would argue this, but some would argue that they are actually following like the true Christianity by like being as literal to the Bible as possible. I don't know if like that's really the case. Plus, you'd have to define what like true Christianity even means. But they definitely take the Bible into more of an account as far as an authority of their lives than you or I certainly would. So interesting to look at the kind of authoritarianism that goes on there. What do you think now that you are a skeptic kind of YouTuber? If you could actually go back in time and talk to your younger self and, kind of help you on that journey, what would you say to that younger Paul? What would be the first thing you would tell him to look at?
Well, actually, the very first thing I think that I would have accepted back then is just this idea that we were just talking about, is that you can't accept everything on authority. So I couldn't have gone in guns blazing with all the facts I know now, because they would have just ricocheted off. I had to set up my armor of God, as it were, to deflect all that stuff. And I had counter apologetics, I guess, to which is where my channel got its name, Apologetics, to beat all that stuff. But no, I think the first thing I would have tried to tear down was authority, and maybe not even biblical authority. Maybe I would have just tried to find some other places in my life where I was treating authority as the number one thing, and just try and break it down kind of as it was. It's like, well, this I had to learn the science on my own. So authority would have been the first place to start. And I probably would have also started to ask, how do you know that? Would have been a question that I would have loved to have taught myself to think about. For example, I hear over and over again, well, the disciples all died for their faith, so it must have been true. And it's like, well, how do you know that? Is there any place in the Bible where it says that the disciples died for their faith? Because the Bible is my ultimate authority. And I would have had to go through and say, well, no, the Bible doesn't say that. So how do we know? And, start tracing some of those things back. And how do you know that, as you know, is a great question in every area of life, from the nightly news to Twitter to anything.
Yeah, for sure. Question. Yeah. That's funny because one of the biggest things for my own journey was the deconstruction of the Bible as an authority and looking at these documents in a historical context that I had never really considered before. For me growing up, it was always, these are the books that we listen to because these people were inspired by God, or even God had written some of this himself. And so we ought to listen to this. We ought to hear what they their words have to say, their words apply to the modern day in some sort of context. If we can figure out that context, then we can know what this sort of means. But looking at it from like, first of all, I didn't know that there was such a thing as biblical scholarship. I didn't know that these documents had been studied endlessly in the original languages and stuff of people really trying to figure out what this stuff means. And just out of that scholarship, how much we actually don't know about these documents was really fascinating, because I mean, I went to church my whole life. I did the Sunday school. I knew all the stories, but nobody had told me about the anonymous authors of the Gospels, or even like when like the Gospels were even supposedly written, at least according to scholarship and stuff, like these kinds of debates that have been going on in these communities for years and years that were just never made public to me. And it makes me wonder, like, are people, do you think, in the young earth creationist camp kind of in a similar boat? Do you think that they just haven't heard the authorities, at least the scientific authorities on evolution, on, geology and stuff like that? Or do you think they are actually taught it and they're just taught to reject it?
Well, I'm just stepping back a bit. Your journey and mine are very similar. And one of the things that I felt betrayed by was the fact that I started going to pastors and other authorities in my church with the information I was learning. And they're like, oh, yeah, we know that. We just don't tell people. And the fact that like, oh, you guys were trained in this and you're just keeping it secret, kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. But
that's interesting.
To your question, young earth creationists, I think there's been studies that say the more you understand evolution, the more you accept it. Like that if you can actually, someone who can describe evolution accurately probably accepts it as true. I think the evolution that I disbelieved in was a total straw man. I would have asked, why are there still monkeys? I would have asked the questions that I now roll my eyes at. Of course, a dog gives birth to a dog, so duh, no evolution. No, I think it's very much that people learn either a poor version of it. As you can imagine, like in high school, even the people who are taking it in the most secular areas, you're taking it for 1 week of biology 20 or biology 30. You're not getting any kind of comprehensive look at it. You see the poster, the monkey to man poster, and you think you get it. So no, I think at least for me, learning what it was a huge chunk of just accepting it. No, I think the straw man versions of it, like the Kent Hovens of the world, are not describing accurately what evolution is, which is actually one of the reasons why I won't really discuss young earth creationism much with someone who can't at least describe to me what I believe. Like that's one of the things I like to do is, well, can you tell me what evolution is? And then we'll discuss whether it's true. And I don't care if they believe what they're telling me, but they at least describe the theory accurately. So no, I'm with you. I think that they don't understand what it is. They just know that it's a threat to their thing.
That's interesting because when I was first learning what the atheist community kind of uses the word atheist as, and of course there's debate about that, but I had never heard the definition of like a lack of belief. That was really new to me. I always thought it was atheists were people who just, I think my version of it was believed in science or something, which is a totally different framework to work with when you're, especially, when I had no contact with atheists and what they had to say about their own beliefs. And when I really sat down and talked to people and realized, oh no, this is what they're talking about, it's kind of like an aha moment for me, like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. And it's totally different, but I was totally fed that straw man.
And for me, atheist just meant like a worse version of a Satanist. Like whatever a Satanist in my head was, atheist is just one step worse. No, I'm with you. I couldn't have accurately described it either. I'm embarrassed how little I knew at the time, but that's why I'm so hungry to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start taking more calls again. We have a couple of lines open still for people who are taking calls, but I want to know if you can just briefly, and like I don't want you to badmouth anybody or say, anything that you're going to regret later. But I mean, you mentioned a couple names here. You mentioned Kent Hovind, you mentioned Ken Ham, and some of these people. Like, who are these people, and like, what are they trying to do? What is kind of their whole thing?
The people I mentioned there are the ones that are making money off of sustaining this young earth creation belief. And whether they hold it themselves or not, I think, is the question I'm asked most often. Do they really believe it or not? And it almost doesn't matter. It's people who are making, in Ken Ham's case, millions of dollars a year. In other people's cases, who knows? But they're professional teachers of young Earth creation movement, and so there's not that many of them. There's a couple other creation ministries out there, but as you can imagine, when you become the sole, if you can teach authority, if you can say that anyone's version of Christianity other than mine is true, you can actually turn that into a pretty good profit by churning out Sunday school curriculum or adult Bible study curriculum, or just all the books and DVDs and videos that they churn out on a regular basis. If you convince people that your version of Christianity is the right one and everyone else's is wrong, then you can turn quite a profit, because that's the threat for people, is that I don't want to go to hell. I better believe the right one. I want to get my facts straight. So the people I listed there are the people that I would call the influencers in that movement. And I tend to, in my videos, people wonder why I talk to what they call low-hanging fruit sometimes. But I always want to talk about the people that are influencing the most people and influencing the people that I love. In fact, most of my family and friends are still Christians. So I want to address the issues that might help them.
Yeah, that's so funny, because growing up, the one narrative that I heard like the most every Sunday was, well, you don't want to be like the fake Christians. You don't want to be like these Christians over here who were either A, sinning all the time, or B, like had the wrong beliefs, or like, see a combination of the two, maybe some other thing, and I think that's a strong pull for a lot of people who are pushing young Earth creationism, because they're trying to say, look, we have the Bible scriptures right here that are backing up our claims, and you don't want to be a Christian that goes against the Bible. You don't want to be a Christian that is, rubbing against what Jesus is putting out there. You know what I mean? You want to follow what Jesus says. You want to get to heaven, or live a good life, live a good spiritual life without sin, and that requires you to have this belief. At least that's what I get from a lot of, at least with Ken Ham and Ken Hovind and those guys who talk about this stuff.
Well, you name the Christian denomination, and all of the other denominations are the worst enemies. I mean, it's not unique to young Earth creationism that way, but absolutely, it's they don't fear the atheist so much, because they can just write me off and say he's an atheist. What they fear the most is another Christian who comes in who also accepts these scientific facts, because that's hard to reconcile with. They can argue that it's a worldview issue all day long. They say, oh, it's the same. We're just looking at the same evidence with a different worldview. But when someone with your worldview comes to that conclusion, that's the danger, not someone like me now.
Yeah. And also these institutions that get propped up because of this kind of industry. I'm trying to think of the name of some of them off the top of my head, but people who are trying to publish scientific papers with kind of this young Earth creationist bent to kind of legitimize some of what they're saying and to give a kind of basis for their arguments and say, look, we've researched this, we've done this thing, and here it is. And it turns out it was researched by some of the same people who are publishing that defense article in the first place, and all kinds of stuff going on there. There's a lot of money that gets handed around, those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that's what I try and teach in my videos, is something called source methodology, which I had never heard of before. But it's basically, when you look at an article in a newspaper about science, like, it doesn't matter what it is, usually at the bottom there's a link to the actual scientific paper. And it's a good practice to go look at that paper, because we can see them, at least the abstracts, and find out if what the paper said is actually what the reporter said, because who knows? And so it's following that trail, like you were mentioning about some of these journals, where you start to find out that these 4 different sources for chimp DNA, as one example, there's studies out there that says chimps are really only about 70 or 76% similar to us, not 98. Well, Shannon and I went looking for these papers, and turns out that 4 of them are by the same guy. And he just kept referring to himself. So it wasn't there was 4 different sources for this. There was one
Ah.
source, and it was a guy that had software bugs. He was
Trying to
literally
do-
running the wrong version of a software that had a known bug in it,
Oh,
and he
wow.
refused to update.
Ah.
But but it doesn't matter because Answers in Genesis, all these guys still keep citing the same paper over and over, because people in general aren't going to go look. Who has time in their day to go digging and looking? So that's
sure.
why channels like mine, we go hunting and fishing and in the dumpster to try and get to the facts.
Well, if you disagree with some of the facts that Paul is putting out tonight, feel free to call into the show. I think we're about to take some calls in a second. Are you ready to get that done, Paul?
I'm ready for that. I'm excited for callers.
Cool. Well, first, before we take in these callers, I want to give 2 quick announcements. First one is for our ACA newsletter. We have our digital edition for February. We're going to show a little animation here in just a second. There it is. For those of you listening at home, we're playing a little animation of our digital edition of our monthly newsletter. You should check it out. There's a link in the description for that if you want to see it. The other thing that I want to announce is really cool. This is a new event coming up for Atheist Day. And we actually have a video narrated by some people here you might recognize. And I think we're going to play that in just a second.
Around the world, secular groups are gathering this March to celebrate the first International Atheist Day. While we encourage atheist groups to come together and celebrate, we invite you to join us. Because lacking religion does not constitute hate. Because in many parts of the world, disbelief can have tragic consequences. Because it's time to create an international community. Because where we can be counted, we should. Stand up this March 23rd and join us as we demand to be counted.
Damn, that was the first time I actually got to see that ad. That was pretty slick, guys. Good job.
I love all those people except maybe Eric Murphy.
Yeah, Eric Murphy trying to be like a Discovery Channel documentary narrator over here. I really like it. That was really cool. So yeah, Atheist Day, come check it out. A lot of people from here are going to be there, and all the information for that is going to be in the description of this video as well. Let's go ahead and take some calls. I'm going to start off with Dave, who is in Austin. Dave actually called in last week, and he wants to give us an update about your situation. Can you kind of give us a brief recap on that, Dave?
It's Dave! Hi.
Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Oh, it's going good, yeah.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
you called into the show last week, and you were talking about stuff, and you kind of want to give us an update on that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
So basically, I heard from my dad that my Jehovah's Witness aunt is currently in Jerusalem.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, she's taking religion to the next level ever since she joined Jehovah's Witness, and she just got to Jerusalem. She's going to see all the Christian parts of it, and I was kind of interested of her going to Jerusalem. Like I asked Dad if she can bring back some videos and photos because I'm interested in Jerusalem. I'm not interested with the religion stuff. I'm interested in with the architecture. So, anyways, besides that, she's not having the best of times with relationships with outside, with with our family. Like she's been constantly threatening to not do contact with us anymore. Like what most Jehovah's Witnesses do.
So you've been in contact with her then? Sounds like. I mean, it sounds like since she's going on this trip.
Yeah, it's Jerusalem. She's in another country. Fares are high, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, those of you who don't know and are kind of getting updated on this conversation, we focused a lot on Jehovah's Witnesses last week. We had Telltale Atheist on, an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and Dave was kind of talking about his story with his family and how he was kind of having trouble with some people in his family who were believers and how he was not. And unfortunately, there's a practice of shunning people outside of your faith in the Jehovah's Witnesses that can cause some problems, as we were kind of talking about. And it's good to see that you've got to get a bit of an update on that.
So another thing, we got a new student in science class. So basically, we're learning about biology right now. You know what it is, like humans and stuff. And
I know what biology is, yeah.
Evolution stuff.
Yeah.
And this new student is actually she's not a Jehovah's Witness. No, she's like a fundamental Christian. You've heard of them?
I've heard of them.
And she's like, that's not how we came to be. God created us in 7 days, not in 4 million days. And like, she instantly got D-Hall for trying to indoctrinate everyone.
Yeah.
So she was saying this during class time?
Yes.
And what was the teacher's response?
She was completely silent during the entirety. Like, I don't know what her religion is. Like, I've never asked because I think it's too uncomfortable for a question. And when she was done, the teacher's like, we're going to ask you to go out in the hallway. And as I heard from other students, she got D-Hall for about 2 days.
Put in detention, you mean?
Yes. We call it D-Hall.
I see.
And this is a public high school?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, that's that is actually an interesting thing in the States that students are allowed to say such things. The teacher can never say anything one way or the other, but students are actually allowed to. And that's one of the things that some of these creation.
I know religion of any kind is allowed, and like you're able to talk about it. But if you go to the point where you're shoving down everyone's throats, then it gets dirty.
Yeah. So that's an interesting topic of conversation, like Paul was saying about kind of the ethics behind. I mean, there was whole entire court cases that were defined on what you can teach and what you can't teach through this U.S. Supreme Court in schools. And of course, the law right now is, we can teach science and we can teach things that are basically in the textbooks, and personal religious beliefs and stuff really can't be taught from public school teachers.
I'm looking into colleges right now, and like I've seen some that provide religion classes because they're like Christian schools, and I was looking at Rice University, and they offer a Jewish class for as a minor. And I was surprised. Like, you don't see that every day.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially probably where you're at too.
Yeah. So, anyways, more on religion. I'm basically like the only atheist member of the family. Like everyone else is Christian, and one of them is agnostic. And I'm too afraid to talk to this. Like my parents are Christians too, and I'm afraid to tell them I'm atheist. And like I just believe that atheism is natural. And you've seen have you ever seen Lloyd Evans' spiritual person's guide to atheism, and how he he compared it to like going to a trip on France, and one of and you were like here. Let me rephrase this. An electric company chose 7 people to go to France, and you were one of them. And one of the people who got chosen is one of the executives at the electric company's son, and he said that if whoever spent the least amount of money would have a permanent home in one of the Pacific Islands, and 6 out of the 7 opted this true and sustained themselves into their hotel rooms. And this actually is kind of like, it's definitely referring to atheism. Like, you know how like people subdue themselves if they're like in Christian or Islam, or like they're not allowed to say certain things, they're not allowed to do certain stuff. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's been a lot of great metaphors about how this, religion can kind of control people sometimes. I'm trying to think of who wrote it. There's a great story about the story of the metaphor was a seagull flying in the air who was trying to. There was a group of seagulls who said that you can't fly. This wasn't something that was allowed to do until the seagull actually tried to jump and fly himself and figured out that he could fly. It was kind of this metaphor of breaking free from the kind of groupthink that you can encounter, especially within religious circles. So I'm glad to find that you have a metaphor for you that kind of works for your experiences. I know me and Paul can definitely relate to that for sure.
And Dave, what do you think is going to happen if you... What do you expect is going to happen if and when you tell them?
This is like I'm not sure, but I'm worried that they're going to hate me for being atheist.
Ooh, well, Paul has a great answer for you here.
Are you still, I assume you're still financially dependent on your family?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So one of the things that, one of the considerations is, perhaps waiting for a while. I know that for me, the intellectual dishonesty kind of can chew at you a bit when you aren't being true to yourself. And I think there's lots of ways in life, various life, where we're not being true to ourselves. That's really hard. But you may have to, wait until you can. But one of the things that I've started to recommend to people is that you start talking about specific doctrines that maybe are on the fringe of what your parents think, and just say that just start introduce the idea that maybe you don't disagree with those or completely are online, just to see how they react and see how they react and what kind of conversations you can have just on something fringe and minor. So maybe like the nature of hell, or whether angels communicate with people, and all those kind of things, and just kind of test the waters, so that when eventually you do tell them, when eventually you can be true to yourself, that it's not a complete surprise, and that maybe you can keep some of that relationship, and they'll understand that you're a valuable person and that your ideas aren't a threat to them, that you've come to this thoughtfully and it's not a reaction to something. That's just something I've been kind of sharing with people who are kind of in your situation, and it seems to be a good strategy.
Well, Paul's being modest here. I thought he was going to talk about a video that he made recently about kids kind of, about talking to parents about religious beliefs and stuff. And I know that
I'm sorry, but I want to talk about something else.
Well, we do have to get to some other callers tonight, though, Dave. But I do appreciate that.
One more thing, please.
Okay. One last thing. Let's get it out there.
So there's this game series called, I bet none of you have heard of this, but it's called Bit Trip.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I've played it before.
And, you've heard of it?
Yeah, I used to play it.
The final game, Bit Trip Flux, tells, like, the entire story, like, the entire game series is told metaphorically. And on the final game, Bit Trip Flux, we can see the main character's path to enlightenment, and things like he can see how he got created, and how he can overcome his anger in the afterlife. And at the very end of the game, we see him disintegrate. And to me, that I don't know if that's going to happen or not. Like path to enlightenment, something like that. I'm not too sure about that. But the game series didn't focus on any religion, how you preach to God or something. But it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, afterlife discussions are pretty prominent in religious circles, I'd say. It's kind of the running theme. And it's definitely a talk that, we as atheists need to consider as well. I mean, we've talked about this before on the show. I mean, it would be a whole other discussion if we really got into it. But my heart towards the conversation is, okay, like, well, what does the evidence show us of our afterlife experience, or if that's even a coherent statement, right? Is there an experience that we have after we die? And my journey into that discussion has told me no. It doesn't seem like that there's any evidence that we have a soul, or that anything is going to happen to me, Objectively Dan, after I die, because Objectively Dan will not be a thing anymore. But there's going to be debate on exactly how that might happen. I think it's just kind of a go to sleep situation and never wake up, but maybe Paul disagrees on that, or maybe he does agree. What do you think?
How it was before we were born.
Mm-hmm.
That's what all evidence says.
I think we're going to get to other callers, but one tiny thing before we go, Paul.
Well, I'm sorry, Dave. We do have to get going here, but I do really appreciate you calling.
I just wanted to say, Paulogia, I saw you for the first time in the top list you did with that creepy rating, the top 22 insane Christian shows, and that's when I met Telltale Atheist too. And I'd like to thank you and Telltale for being in that list. If not, I would never have been to this point. So, all right, I shall be going.
Happy to help.
All right.
That means a lot. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate the call. Man, that was really fun to hear back from people in their situations and stuff like that, and where it's going. Sounds like Dave has a lot to think about on, his family situation and stuff. I mean, it's similar to what we've gone through. I know we both talked about that, but it's definitely different in a Jehovah's Witness context, for sure.
Yeah, the shunning, as I understand it, the shunning level can be. I'm fortunate that even though I lost a lot of friends and that kind of thing, my closest family really stuck by me, even though we worked through some disagreements. So I was fortunate. Yeah,
you can definitely count our blessings, quote unquote, when we look at our experiences. I want to get to another caller here, though. This is Jose in Mexico. I think this is our first caller from Mexico ever. So congratulations, Jose. Says here that Jose is an atheist, and he wants to know why what don't non-believers understand that will help better conversations with young Earth creationists. Did I get that right, Jose?
Yes. Am I on?
Yes, you were on the air. What's up?
Okay. Well, hello, Dan. Hello, Paul.
Hey.
It's good to hear from both of you. Yes, my question is, since I didn't grow up being a younger creationist, I grew up being a Catholic. That's, the beginning of a joke. But so my question goes around, what is it that people who grew up in, I don't mean to sound insulting or anything, but evidence or scientifically minded households need to understand to get their point across to younger creationists? Besides the whole, not just explaining evolution, what is it that a creationist thinks that is so ingrained with a younger and not accepting evolution and an old Earth?
Boy, that's a complicated question, I think. But I think Paul can handle it for sure.
There's at least one. I would say the first thing that you have to do is to demonstrate that that it's possible that the Bible could still be true, and some of these other sciences could be true. Now, whether you believe that or not, in order for a typical young Earth creationist to even accept the science, you're going to have to get them to move to a place where they can accept that parts of the Bible could potentially be allegories or could potentially be non-literal. Because as long as they're holding their eternal destiny on literally every word of the Bible being true, then nothing they hear is going to sink in or be allowed to make a chink in the armor. Now, for me, eventually it was me seeking out the facts on my own that led me to where I was. But no one could have thrown any given fact at me while I was a young Earth creationist that impacted me because I was unwilling to accept the non-literal of the Bible. So I would say the first thing that you'd have to do is at least let them get to the level, show them other Christians who believe it, like show them Dr. Mary Schweitzer, who discovered dinosaur soft tissue, or someone from Biologos, or some of those other ministries that lets them at least accept that they're not going to go to hell for instantly considering the fact that the earth is old. And then beyond that, it's a matter of, I think, teaching them how to be a critical thinker. I don't know, Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we have this thing when we're talking about when we are talking about ideas with people called the backfire effect. And it's something that's been talked about in cognitive psychology for a while, and different debate on how it works and how prominent it actually is. But the basic idea goes like this. If you're going to show somebody a fact that completely contradicts their worldview, let's say that I say to Paul, I think the earth is 6,000 years old. That's just kind of my claim. And Paul just kind of goes, well, Dan, I like you as a friend, but that's just not true. Here's a scientific study that I want you to read that just completely blows your worldview apart and completely says otherwise to everything you've ever believed your entire life, pretty much. I am most likely to reject that information at that moment than absorb any of it. And if anything, I'm going to be on the attack mode. I'm going to start trying to look for things to kind of pick it apart, trying to give some sort of narrative and say, oh, well, this scientist was clearly an atheist with a bias, trying to, disprove the biblical worldview that is ultimately true, right? And because of this backfire effect, it can be hard for us to kind of convince people of beliefs, especially if they're deeply held, and kind of form a worldview like, for example, creationism does. How we get around that, there's different people who have different ideas. I employ a method called street epistemology. If you don't know what it is, it's a thing. Look it up on YouTube. A good friend of mine, Anthony Magnabosco, Reed Nicewander, and lots of people in the SE community basically go out on the street and try to talk to people about their beliefs and see how those conversations go. It works wonders, in my opinion, on how you can really rearrange these conversations. A lot of people who go into this, they're looking for debates. They're like, okay, I'm going to get every single argument on my side here, and I'm just going to throw it all out there and see what sticks. And while that can be effective in certain contexts, it may not be effective in the context that you're looking for, especially if you're just talking to a coworker or a friend or a family member who like casually knows, about this topic, or may not even be super well informed on specific topics like this. So long story short, there's multiple ways, some of which are better than others, in my opinion, for certain contexts. But there's just no one-size-fits-all method, especially when you have as broad of a spectrum of beliefs as young Earth creationism, because you have to understand that, that encompasses a wide variety of different kinds of ideas that might have to individually be broken down, as opposed to, just one, like I said, one-size-fits-all kind of argument. Does that make sense, Jose?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me tell you that I am familiar with street epistemology.
Right on.
I've been watching. I haven't seen all the episodes of this show, but I'm familiar with Anthony. I'm familiar with Reed. I'm familiar with you. I'm familiar with Paul and the whole non sequitur great debate community. I'm not looking. I'm not looking for the knockout punch or the knife between the ribs. I'm not looking for the soft underbelly. Just like, what is it about? Is it related to original sin, or I don't know, like biblical inerrancy? Like, what is it that that people is it related to ultimate moral lawgiver and ultimate judge or something that? I'm trying to wrap my head around the mindset.
I think you'll find, at least if I'm speaking for my church.
I don't. Sorry.
If I'm speaking for my church, which is very fundamental, and like the church Christianity, brand of Christianity I was in was very fundamentalist. It's a very black and white mindset. There's anyone who interprets things even slightly is a liberal and they're terrible. So when you're in that black and white mindset, everything is binary. The Bible is 100% true or it is 0% true. Like there's no 99% true. So when your mindset is that, then you have to keep your guard up against everything. And so you're exactly everything you listed: original sin, salvation, like all the things. Jesus said that he believed. Jesus talked about Adam. Now, some people interpret that differently, but when you're a fundamentalist, you don't interpret it differently. You say, Jesus talked about Adam. Adam has to be true. Adam is original sin. It's in the Bible. So it's hard for someone who is, I now understand nuance better, but when you're not willing to accept nuance, it's either black or it's white. So that's why I guess part of my advice was to try to introduce nuance, and I think that's what street epistemology does as well. It's even just to introduce the idea of nuance so that your whole world isn't destroyed by something only being 99% true. Because for me, that was what did it. As soon as it was 99% true, well, then it became 0. Does that make sense?
Would parables be an example of that? To say, like, I mean, if I ask in a serious epistemology kind of way, if I ask, what's it really a prodigal son, or what's it really someone sowing seeds in weeds and stone, and I don't know I don't remember what the story was.
That's not bad. I mean, and if you want to take that route,
you think
what you want
to,
what you actually want to do there.
Go for it, Paul. Keep going.
What you want to do there, if you're going to introduce that's a great idea. I love it. What you want to say is, well, Jesus spoke about these things that were obviously not historically true events. He used these tales. Then you could say, well, what you want to reemphasize is, for them, a fundamentalist Christian, Jesus wrote the Old Testament too, because Jesus was there. Jesus created the universe. So you specifically want to say, is it possible that Jesus, who created the universe, was also trying to teach these first people through parables as well? Because what you want to emphasize there is that to a fundamentalist, God never changes, because there's verses that say God never changes. So if you say, well, if Jesus, when he came to earth, wanted to use stories, even introduce that concept to them. Maybe Jesus was using stories in the Old Testament as well, because that's an idea that would have been new to me, and maybe something I would have had to go home and think about. So that's a great idea.
Because I mean, Jesus is the hippie son of the desert warlord, so that kind of contradicts. But they're both the same, but they're not the same.
Don't bring up contradictions.
Yeah, I remember you bringing something similar. I mean, not bringing the Old Testament to the New Testament, but I remember you bringing Jesus into the New Testament when you were, I don't know if it was you or Shannon talking to Stu Thomason. And that when I think it was Shannon who asked, did Jesus drown people in the flood, or did Jesus command the angel of death to slaughter people in Egypt? I can't remember if it was you or Shannon.
That was Shannon, yeah. I think Doug may have helped.
So, yeah. Maybe that approach is more from when you have rapport.
Oh, maybe, but I think where your mind was going was great. The idea of parables, the idea that Jesus used parables in the New Testament, so maybe he used them in the Old Testament too, is going to start opening that door a little bit to soften the black and white binary thinking of a fundamentalist.
Okay. By the way, if I'm holding up any callers, please let me know, and I'll wrap it up.
You got one more question for us, Jose? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, if yeah, I mean, just thank both of you for what you're doing. Like I said, I wasn't brought up a younger creationist. I was religious, and now I'm not. And Mexico it's a bit of a mixed bag where you don't get the same fight that you do with textbooks. Where do you teach creationism or do you teach evolution? As far as I remember, at least like 20 years ago when I was in elementary school, I did learn about evolution. None taught me about radiometric dating and all that. So you don't get that conflict, but you are seeing a bit of a struggle now that Catholicism is losing ground, not as fast as it should, but still fast, and it's being replaced by non-belief and other branches of a more extreme version of Christianity. So that's also a thing.
No, we need a guest host on here from Mexico that can give us kind of the lowdown of what the religious situation in Mexico is like. We have a lot of people on here from the U.S. and Canada, and even from the U.K. at one point. But we need some Mexican representation on this show. I think that would be really fun. Well,
am I on with all three hosts? I mean, all two hosts.
Are you on with all three hosts? What do you mean?
Two hosts.
Two hosts, yeah. You're with both of us. You're on the air right now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so we have a bit of a North American...
Oh, I see what you're saying. We got like a Trinity thing going on here. Yeah, Canada, U.S., Mexico.
Let's just bang out NAFTA while we're here.
Sorry, I didn't recognize Dan's voice for a while there. But yeah, we have a bit of a North American tandem call right now.
There we go. I love that. That is so cool. Well, Jose, thank you for calling, man. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah. No, thank you for taking my call, and keep doing what you're doing, and keep talking. I'm not going to say keep swinging because you're not throwing punches, but keep talking.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it. Oh, gosh, that was super, super fun. I want to give a quick shout out to the people in the chat who are representing us tonight as well. There's a lot of great content creators in there who are supporting this show. If you do like this show, I encourage you to support it on Patreon. That is Truth Wanted, or patreon.com/Truth Wanted. All of that money, 100% of it, goes straight to the show. I don't get any of it for myself. It all goes towards making the ACA better and making Truth Wanted better. So definitely give us a ring on there. Yeah. What did you think about that conversation, Paul? Because that was kind of fun. No, actually, no. Before I ask you that, I want to ask you a question because I know about the Scopes trial and stuff in the United States as far as education on that front. But is it similar there in Canada as far as the kind of separation between church and state when it comes to teaching in schools and stuff?
So it depends on, just like it's state by state. There in the U.S. Every province has their own ability to do things the way they want. So most of Canada is very good about separating church and state. There's one exception, and that's where I live in Alberta, where we're basically Canada's Texas. And so
I take offense to that, okay?
Nobody
can be anybody's Texas. Only Texas can be Texas's Texas. All right.
We're huge. We have oil. We're you can't see anything when you drive around. It's the same.
All right. Okay. When you come to Faithless Forum, Paul, we'll see if you have the same opinion that you just.
I've been to Texas. I've been to Texas.
Oh, you really? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, but no, in Alberta, unfortunately, there's a lot of some of that stuff creeps in. But the bigger movement in Canada is actually in the homeschool movement. And in homeschool, it's very unregulated, and so you can end up using tax dollars for almost anything. For example, if you want to raise your daughters to be good wives and play piano at church, you can gear their entire education toward homemaking and learning to play piano.
Really?
And learning about the sick. And so the homeschool front is one of the ones that I'm most concerned about here in Canada. And that's, for those of you who know my little legacy with Ken Ham and his homeschool conference here. It's it's kind of the thing that got me from being in cartoon to having to end up showing my face because I ended up being on the news for some of this stuff. But no, there's the same fights happening in Canada. Fortunately, I would say for most of the country, it's winning. That science is holding the day.
Huh. Wow. Yeah, I know of some friends in my life, who, of course, this is the United States, but who got their kids out of school because they felt like the secular education wasn't good enough for them, or they felt uncomfortable. Specifically, the story they cited to me was they were learning about Egyptian history at some point. I never took a class on Egyptian history, but whatever, that's what they told me. And they were tasked to create like little models out of clay, like to basically be kind of their own gods, I guess, because, kind of doing a mythology and stuff. And this family was really mad about that because they thought that this was creating idols. And so they wanted to, they took their kids out of the school, and now they're homeschooling their 3 kids now because of that. And as soon as I guess maybe there were some other grievances with the school there as well. But when I heard that, I was like, okay.
I've got to think that if making Play-Doh stuff causes you religious grief, there were other grievances as well.
I would hope so. But you never know with these kinds of things. Let's go on to our next caller, though. This is Milo in Portland. I'm wondering if this is outside of really the scope of this show, but let's take a crack at it anyway. Milo is wanting to ask us if American politics are too binary regarding communism versus capitalism. This is interesting. I'm not sure if we've talked about this on the show before, but you know what? Why not? Let's do it. Milo, are you on the air? Are you?
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
I just wanted to say I'm here from Telltale. Before I get too much farther.
Awesome.
Great guy.
Yeah, he is a great guy. Cool. So yeah, if you could just kind of, elaborate on that question for us a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, the main thing I'm seeing is that with communism, it's any move towards even moderate socialism is considered communism, and, people seem to assume that people see communism as entirely not working based what seems to be on mostly faith rather than practical experience. And sure, some communist countries are messed up, but I would point out that one thing in the Communist Manifesto is that it calls for getting children out of factories.
Yeah, I will answer to this first, because I know Paul wasn't ready to answer these kinds of questions, and I know that I sure was, but I'll give my hot take on this first. I don't know about communism. I do know that America itself has already adopted kind of basically socialist policies, and most people don't even categorize those things as socialist policies if we're talking about Medicare and Medicaid and different kinds of welfare programs and things like that. And of course, there are some people who say, oh yeah, we don't want these things and they want to take these out. But I think obviously, the history of the United States, there has been, a shall we say, religious fervor against communism, against our enemies that, we deem were bad because they had communist societies. And a lot of that was for good reason. We see that a lot of these societies had people who were struggling, and, that's a fact as far as I'm concerned. Whether or not we could implement those kinds of policies, or the people who originally came up with these ideas, like Marx and Engels and stuff, for American society, I don't know. That's beyond me and beyond the scope of what I'm capable of knowing. I definitely didn't go to school for political science. What I will say is that people are definitely ignorant to this, and I wish if people were to talk about communism or capitalism, I wish it was done in a more mature way. I wish people would have better reasons than the ones they do now, besides that guy was a communist, boo communism, and kind of the general rhetoric that we see today. Do you have any thoughts on this, Paul?
I guess, living in Canada, which is most Americans would consider to be, this close to communist as it is, our most right-wing party brought in things like gay marriage and socialized medicine. That was our most right-wing party that we had that did that. So, but all I wanted to say was, I feel like communism is one of those words that it's a useful weapon. So it will probably never be given the fair shake that it needs, because it's a label that you can throw on ideas you don't like. So there
Kind
are
of like
words,
atheist.
there are words. I was going to say the word, like the word atheist. That it's too bad that certain labels get thrown against something merely just to discredit them without having to discuss the idea further. And so it's weird because much like I'm trying to normalize the word atheist, that's one of my goals. I don't know that there's an advocate for the word communism, but there probably maybe Bernie. I don't know.
There's definitely advocates for communists out there.
Well,
man.
I mean, even just the word, right? There's probably maybe a new word is needed for some of those ideas. But
yeah, man, you got to check r/late stage capitalism on Reddit.
Yeah.
It's one I browse pretty frequently. Like I'm all about critiquing. And I definitely think if we're talking about a binary capitalism versus communism, there are critiques of capitalism that we should consider. And like, I think of the recent story with Amazon, for example, not having to pay some of their taxes and actually, benefiting from taxpayer money to some extent. I think that's wrong for sure. I definitely am not a fan of corporations taking over people's individual lives and people not having the mobility that we used to. And I think that there's statistical data that backs up that claim that there is kind of a shrinking middle class. And we kind of have to consider these things when we're creating, future economic policies and stuff. As far as, a total dismantlement of the government that we have now and a complete dismantlement of capitalism and stuff, I'm not there yet. As far as, if we're talking personal opinions, I'm definitely not there yet. But I am with you as far as, hey, let's have a conversation about this and see what we can change and improve. I think we are seeing a lot of rhetoric on that. I don't know. I think I've said my piece on that enough. I wouldn't call myself a communist, but I don't think capitalism is like 100% the greatest thing in the world either. So,
as an outside observer,
call me a centrist. Not really. Don't do that, but
outside observer, I think I can rightfully say that everything about American politics is too binary.
Okay, well, you're probably not wrong there. You're probably not wrong. Yeah. What do you think about this, Milo?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would add in is just like with capitalism is that it's not prepared for automation. Automation should mean everyone's working less and not people are working for less. Because we're nearing the point with stuff to where I would say within probably 10 to 15 years we could get food if none of us worked, or if almost none of us worked. And there's other needs certainly, but
yeah, I mean universal basic income, and these kinds of new ideas and stuff are kind of hot. I think that's kind of cool. I think we should check them out. See if they.
I'm a Gene Roddenberryist. I think we should all be working for Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Oh, okay. I'm down. Sign me up. I don't know what I can contribute to that, but I think that's cool. Well, hopefully, Milo, that kind of answered your question about our opinions on this topic. Definitely kind of out of left field for the show, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. That was really cool.
All right. Hey, nice talking to you.
All right, thanks.
Good to have a debate with some people who aren't too. Anything but capitalism means communism, which means destruction of everything.
Oh, yeah. No. There's definitely some nuance there, and I'm glad we could totally tackle that. Thanks again for calling, Milo. Yeah. Well, we still have lines that are open and stuff. If you still want to call, we still got some time left on the show if you want to talk to us about, I guess, pretty much anything at this point.
Apparently.
We just got our political opinions out there on things. Yeah, I feel like, this is an interesting thing because when you become an atheist, Paul, did you notice your political opinions shifting alongside that religious change?
That was absolutely bizarre to me, yeah. Because, so for example, taking a look at things like abortion or even like things like communism or whatever, all of a sudden I had to think about them again. It's like, why did I hold the view that I had? And was it just because I was towing a Christian line? And yeah, I have to say, even though I still would consider myself fiscally conservative, very much not socially. So, I mean, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but I would have probably been uncomfortable with gay marriage. I would have been uncomfortable, even though we had it. I would have been uncomfortable with abortion rights. I would have been uncomfortable with a lot of those things. And I know none of those things are synonymous with atheism, because atheists can hold any view on abortion and any view on gay rights and any view on all those things. But when I had to rebuild my worldview from scratch, that was when I was able to take account as to, again, why did I believe these things? Did I have good reasons for feeling the way I did, or was it just my personal emotion? So yeah, it was a strange phenomenon kind of a year after I became an atheist. It's like, oh, I got to rethink everything now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely lean more left now than I used to.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I was part of the Young Republicans Club. I remember Turning Point USA was just getting started, and I remember our group was asked to like submit articles for that. That's like Charlie Kirk's whole thing.
Okay.
That was before Charlie Kirk was, I think, really known as he is now. I never submitted to it. Even at the time, I thought it was kind of goofy. I was like, oh, you're just going to take students' submissions and just kind of make money off of that for your organization for publishing those? Okay, well, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I definitely...
You're too young, but I don't know if you heard of the show Family Ties, Michael J. Fox's big break.
You know, I never watched Family Ties. I know what it is. I've never really seen it.
Michael J. Fox's character's name was Alex P. Keaton, and he was the ultimate Republican in that show. And he's actually who I named my son after. I was so Republican and so in that mindset that my son is actually named after that character. So, yeah, so it's weird to look back.
Yeah, just to be clear, if you're a Republican and you want to talk to us and be on the show and stuff, we're cool. We're not in that camp as much anymore.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But there are atheists who are Republican and who are right leaning, like a lot more than what people would think, which is really, really interesting.
Well, of course, in Canada we have 9 parties on our ballot, so we don't have that same binary system where you can choose something where someone is okay with social programs, but also doesn't want to go into debt. Where unfortunately in the States, you sometimes have to make, I think no matter what party you go with, there's a Sophie's choice. You're like, I disagree with them on X, Y, and Z. So you kind of have to pick the things you care about most.
Yeah, I want to, this topic is so interesting to me. And I don't think we've really explored this much on the show. I just want to go back to this real quick because we're talking about like religious beliefs that influence our political kind of stakeholders. Maybe I have mentioned this story before, but like one of the things that really got me, because there were logical arguments to get me to where I am, and there are also emotional arguments that got to me to where I am. And one of those emotional arguments was the treatment of the LGBT community in particular from Christianity. And, like the kind of Jesus character that I knew growing up, obviously didn't actually say anything about LGBT people. Not really. I mean, there's a thing about eunuchs, but like it doesn't really count. And at least in the conversations that we're having, right? It was always, I didn't realize how much of that was really coming from the mouthpieces of religious leaders in the community and stuff. And I remember in the college group I was in, hearing about a talk that was being given on gay conversion therapy and stuff. And this was right at the time when I was really learning about this kind of stuff, learning how this was just complete pseudoscience and stuff, and how people were being hurt. And I got into an argument with some people in my kind of college group. I was like, we can't be talking about this way. This is harmful. This has been harming people. And I think if we're going to be Christians, we need to be concerned about the welfare of people and how they're living their lives, and not be concerned as much as harming them in this way. And that conversation I remember having with people really struck with me, because I realized these people didn't have that perspective. They always had the perspective of people are gay because there's something internally wrong with them, or, they're sinning in some sort of way, or they know that it's wrong and that, God is trying to tell them otherwise. And it just made me realize how much of that belief was just completely based on just religious thinking and not really any sort of logical, metric outside of that, if that makes sense.
It does. The inverse of that is also true. It's interesting that everyone's God has the same prejudices that they have. So you can always create the God in your likeness that, I don't like X, Y, and Z. So it's the same reason you'll have like prosperity gospel people and also social gospel people who want to do everything to feed people. The Bible and most religions are so malleable that whatever you want to pick and choose, you could create a god and justify it to just carry forth the same opinion you already have.
Yeah, until you run into some apologist or some other, and then you get debates started. But that's really what's hard for me because, we had a caller last week that was asking me what I thought about, like why I didn't believe in God specifically, I guess was the question that he had, and what arguments I had against God. I think was more specifically what he was asking. And it's almost like, okay, well, you have to pick which one, because even in Christianity, there's just so many different kind of versions of these beliefs and stuff. And I don't have one argument that covers all of them, really. I just have inferences and like general conclusions I have about specific versions of this God and these beliefs. And I really don't like the fact when people are talking about Christianity where there's this assumption that there's just this one version of it that's true, and then there's a bunch of heretics, because that's literally what all the Christians believe about their own beliefs, and right. it's an endless talking point.
Although it's funny because the young Earth creationist God is one of the ones I say definitely does not exist. Like there might be a God, but the 6,000 year God I now put in the shelf of impossible. Just much like we all say, lightning doesn't come from Thor, so Thor is on the impossible shelf. I think maybe the Christian God could exist. I don't have sufficient evidence for that, but definitely not the 6,000 year young Earth creation God. That one doesn't exist.
Okay, well, Paul, let me play devil's advocate for you here. Maybe the evidence you found, doesn't really fit this 6,000-year-old world hypothesis. But what if God just made it kind of look like that? And, it's just the way that God made things, and he doesn't have to explain himself to you.
Well, God in the Bible says that he is not the God of deceit. So that immediately puts you into God as being the deceiver God at that point, because he's created things with an appearance the way he didn't. And that God is going to lead people astray unnecessarily because he's going to be fooling people. Now, Kent Hovind thinks this is a positive attribute of God. He actually says that if I was God and I was writing the Bible, I would deliberately put contradictions in it to weed out the people who don't want to believe.
Really? He says that?
Yeah. He would, and that putting in some stuff that looks like, maybe carbon dating or radiometric dating shows billions of years. That's to test people's faith, and that's to make sure that only the good ones get in. But,
oh my gosh!
No, to your
I haven't heard that one. That's a new one to me. Wow.
I'll have to send you some clips. It's juicy and delicious. But could we all have been? That almost goes to like last Thursdayism. Is it possible that God made us all last Thursday with memories of what happened? Well, maybe. And that actually goes to my new series about knowledge. Not to plug my channel, but there's a knowledge. I'm doing one based on some.
Plug it right now.
Truth. I just recently, my last video is called Truth Without God, which is exploring, the idea that some people will say, without God, you can't even talk about truth. And the thing I put forward, the shorthand of it is, well, as long as we're all measuring against reality, it doesn't matter, because if God is real, he's a subset of reality. And if there is no God, we still want to measure against reality. So as long as we all measure against reality, we can all come to the same conclusion, God or not. And then the follow-up to that is going to be about knowledge without God. Some people say you can't know anything without God, and
yes,
that's a whole mess.
I was just about to ask you about that. I guess you don't want to go into it now, but that's something that comes up. That's come up on this show, like presuppositionalism and stuff. And I have my own ideas of how to tackle that, but can you give a teaser? Just a little? Yeah.
The way to deal with presupposition is to acknowledge. When I first came out of this, I was afraid to acknowledge that I had my own presuppositions, but we all do. That's what I had to come to grips with, is that none of us can justify everything. The whole last Thursdayism or the brain in a vat or Matrix. So the way to deal with the presuppositionalist is to acknowledge first that you have some. So I have two presuppositions, that the universe exists and that we can learn things about it. I have those two presuppositions. I cannot justify those. There's nothing, no philosophy, nothing can really justify those. So if I stand on saying, okay, the universe exists and we can learn things about it, that is less of an assumption than there is a God, because we all look around and we see the universe. We all look around and we find out that we realize that gravity worked yesterday and gravity still works today every time I drop my pen. That doesn't guarantee that next time I drop my pen, it's not going to fall, but at least we have some concrete. If your presupposition, like an Eric Hovind, is that God exists, that hasn't been demonstrated. So you're at least, that presupposition is a little bit harder to swallow than my two presuppositions. And generally, I can get a young Earth creationist to agree that the universe exists and that we can learn things about it. So that's, and then it takes away their fight, the struggle of presuppositionalist, just the idea that we have presuppositions. So I would say if you are arguing with a theist, grant them that you are assuming those two things, and maybe you want to have more, without fighting them on it, so that you can get to a more fruitful conversation than just the idea of whether presuppositions are good or bad. Because honestly, we can't really justify those two things that I mentioned. We just take them as axiomatic.
Yeah, no, for sure. I work with a similar set of axioms that I can't remember off the top of my head, and I always forget. And I keep them on a list on my phone just so when I have discussions like this, I can bring them up. I think it's something along the lines of like, I exist, and physical evidence is a good way to come to, or physical evidence can tell us things about the world or something like that. You know, something pretty similar to what you've got going on.
If I added a third one, it would be that that ideas with predictive power are better than ideas without predictive power.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that one. But yeah, that's an interesting side tangent that I'm glad we touched about, because it has come up several times, and
has it been helpful in those? Like, does it?
Oh, for sure.
Does it help break down the barriers a bit?
I think so, because I think this is a really, like, people struggle with precept stuff. I notice when they have these conversations, and at least the ones that I've seen online, and I don't think it's as difficult as people make it out to be necessarily. But I also know that, you know, it would, where I'm at now as a person, a precept argument would just never convince me. You know, it just wouldn't get me anywhere. I think you just have to have a little bit more if we're talking about as big of a thing as the God of the universe and some others, all the stuff that comes along with that, you know?
The other shoe to drop on the precept is it's basically comes down to confidence levels, and no amount of the preceptor knows divinely, and they say, well, you only say that you probably know, so therefore my argument is better than yours based on our confidence levels, is of course ridiculous, but they phrase it cleverly, so you're not thinking about the fact that they're trying to win just because they're more confident of their idea than you are.
Yes.
The confidence level in your idea has nothing to do with the truth of the idea. I could have the truth and doubt it, and you can have something false and be. So that's the other level. Is just remember that confidence doesn't mean correctness.
For sure. Well, we have some more callers here that I want to get to real quick. This is Josh in Virginia, and Josh wants to tell us about a personal experience with a recent death in his family. Josh, are you with us?
Hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going?
I've been listening for a little bit. I love your show.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to call and we'll share kind of some things that have happened over the last couple of days.
Okay, go for it.
So my grandfather passed away recently of cancer. It was late stage metastatic type stuff by the time it was found. I've talked to my mom about all manner of things for several years, and kind of something I've heard talked about on Atheist Experience and on Talk Heathen is that the way that people end up deconverting, if that ends up being their choice, has to do more with kind of like showing them breadcrumbs of truth. And it in this case, what really drew my mom at least towards questioning things, was never the anger. It was never the frustration. It was never even the pleading. It was simply kind of opening the door and just letting life happen. And today, she actually basically talked to me for like an hour and a half straight, very emotional, with she's going through that change. And I honestly didn't even think that would ever happen.
Wow.
So what kind of happened, and this all ties together even with what you guys were talking about on the last call, that for many people and in many ways, the politics and the religion is intertwined. And there's kind of a cultural stigma around discussing either, because to try and pull someone away from either of their opinions on those two topics is both kind of taboo, at least here.
For sure.
So kind of the same thing, kind of quid pro quo. It's always been difficult to even approach those topics, but to kind of get to my story, her father might have gotten several decades more out of his life had he been given better medical care, had it not been something that was based on his ability to pay and where that ended up leaving him with his insurance and what hospital he was sent to. My sister-in-law works as a radiologist, so she works with oncology. She knows what she's doing. There were lots and lots of things that could have happened. And my mom was also in medicine. She was a pediatrician in the Navy. So I guess in my case, it isn't as surprising that this happened. But for her, it was just watching the things around her happen, watching people that in a kind of domino effect way get hurt by these things that, might not seem like they're going to hurt people when you're going to a voting booth and you're just listening to what some person told you on the TV. It's all, it sounds very conspiratorial to say it that way, but everything is kind of connected in that way. And it took a long time in my case to deconstruct and to learn everything from the source. And, just for instance, just reading the voting record. Don't listen to any of the different politics. Just look up who your region is, look up your district, look up the politicians that are running, and go read their voting record, see how they vote, read the bills, and see if you like how they voted.
Yeah.
It's all a lot simpler than it might seem.
So I've heard debates on how much these statistics are true or not, but if we're talking about specifically with like Donald Trump, for example, there is a lot of evangelical support for Donald Trump, and you see a lot of these kinds of memes that go around supporting him. I saw one. I swear to you, I saw one
running the same groups. It's a pack.
I'm gonna post this on Twitter later, but I swear I saw one where it's like Donald Trump. It's a painting, I think, of Donald, or maybe a Photoshop of Donald Trump walking with Jesus Christ and saying like, "This was my chosen son" and stuff, And I'm not even specifically trying to make fun of Donald Trump or any kinds of thing, but like you just see this happen pretty commonly with this kind of rhetoric of the ones in power already or these authorities are chosen by God or are chosen for specific purposes and stuff. And therefore we have to listen to them as kind of an authority. And there's kind of like a justification there, a legitimization for people that are already in power. And I think that as a topic alone is really interesting to study. And that's not to say that it doesn't happen with people who lean on the left as well. I think you can, there's a, debatable idea about like secular religions and stuff, but there are definitely groupthink. I think groupthink does happen on kind of both sides, and we kind of legitimize authority in both of those kinds of ways. And I know Paul probably has, for sure has had experience hearing this kind of rhetoric for sure.
So, Josh, I wanted to first of all say sorry for your loss. Very sorry for your loss. I myself am a cancer survivor. I am very glad that I lived in Canada at the time. I used to live in California, but my entire cancer treatment cost me about $2,000, and that most of that was parking.
Oh my gosh!
One of the things that I cannot wrap my head around is that that America's health system is as bad as it was. When I lived in California, my kid's mom worked as a nurse, and it was so obvious that one hospital would have everything you ever needed, and if you had good health care, you could go there, and everything would be taken care of for you. A mile away would be a terrible, terrible hospital where you would have to wait for hours and hours with broken limbs or whatever. Just the have and have not situation astonishes the rest of the world.
Here, there's literally a hospital that's almost all black people that's known to be the crappiest place in Southern Virginia. And there's an area that's 35, 40 miles away that's about 4 times as expensive, but it's about 20 times the quality.
The rest of the world is astonished. I mean, in Canada, we pay insane amounts of tax, and there's probably a balance in there somewhere. I know you guys probably don't want to jump to 50% tax brackets, but I really hope this is something
only
someone
because
solves.
of the economics of it. I know that actually. I'm a business major. I am literally studying to be a Marxist economist. That's kind of what I'm trying to do right now. It's very freaking hard.
That's a completely side tangent, but like I was joking earlier about like late stage capitalism and stuff, some of these forums I browse, and they have this joke among people, these people who study business and economists, they say that these economy majors and stuff are just capitalist propaganda machines, basically, and that's what these kind of majors are created for.
It's about how you understand it. I mean, operating costs is something that has to be reduced in order for a company to become profitable. But in order to reduce operating costs, you have to suppress wages or outsource jobs or reduce it's a fact of the matter. It's literally just your opinion on it. Like, it's kind of like reading the Bible is for atheists. If you learn business economics, I've had this conversation out with people. Tell somebody with a income of over $1 million a year what they think about teaching personal finance in public school. No.
Yeah, interesting.
That's the problem with it. Everybody is very capable of working their way up the spectrum, but they're not taught how to handle their money as a we're taught so much in school, but then the 2 most important things I think would be teaching rudimentary law based on your region, your district, and personal finance. People need to know what's going to put them in jail, and they need to know how to keep themselves from going bankrupt. It's fairly basic, but it's another conversation about all the education stuff. My mom still doesn't believe in evolution, even though she fully. That's weird. That's the one thing that, like, everything else has fallen away, and she still she even believes in climate change now, but evolution, somehow she says that, well, it's either here, but maybe it's going to be disproven someday. It's hard to believe that she's got 3 master's degrees from Duke University in
Does she
a
pull
medical
out the
field.
it's just the theory idea?
I think so. I mean, it's fascinating what people end up coming up with in order to make sure that they, and with other topics, she's kind of admitted that it's like doing some kind of really crazy dance in order to come up with an explanation for what you're believing.
She probably doesn't fully understand it either. She probably has resisted learning what it is.
Ask like a molecular biologist about it.
Yeah. Well, I think what it is we do kind of silo ourselves with knowledge on some of these things. I know that I've definitely had conversations with brilliant people who study medicine, for example, who don't have any idea about like kind of the history of the world, I guess. And like, when I asked them, I don't want to say history of the world, I guess like real deep evolutionary topics like anthropology in particular, I guess, like they'll know stuff about the coccyx and stuff. I was talking to them about that. But when it came to like, when we trace the origins of Homo sapiens, and when we look at it between these other species that came about at the same time.
Someone who makes a car and a mechanic, though, because the reason for that even kind of makes sense. They don't really need to know what the history behind the body is. They need to know how it works.
Yeah, and I think we get
like the 3 R's and stuff.
We as people who dedicate ourselves to exploring these topics all the time and like make a habit of it in our free time to do it, I think it seems more surprising to us than it really should be, only because in your normal daily life, you're only going to encounter so much knowledge. And if you're studying for something, you're kind of going towards, one point on a spectrum of different kinds of fields that you could study. So I guess I should say it doesn't surprise me that your mom thinks that way, although, one would think that at some point they would encounter
give her time.
that.
Like if she's come this long way, give her time and she'll figure it out.
She's come a long way on a lot of stuff. She's gonna end up voting for Bernie this time around. I pretty much guarantee it. She nearly wrote him in last time.
That's interesting.
And it was already kind of one of those things where she already believed in all the different things he was saying, but she was still kind of one of those, oh, well, how is it going to work? And she was still very skeptical on how it would work. But even then it was kind of like, well, we were talking about a long shot. Like, it's, I think the argument that even convinced her on that level was, if they're all BS, shouldn't you at least go for the one that sounds good? Like,
maybe so.
It all does. Like, she's on my side with pretty much all those different issues now. When it comes to like the Medicare for all type stuff, it would be better for seniors. It is going to come with hearing, dental, and glasses, optometry, which essentially, 40% of Social Security is going into healthcare costs above and beyond their Medicare. So Medicare is not even covering seniors' medical costs, and they're using their Social Security to pay for it. So it would save us money on Social Security, which is like one of the biggest problems.
Josh, you are like,
it's so easy.
Yeah, this is so good because you're giving me so many different specific beliefs you have. And like a Marxist economist, like I totally want to know more about that. Like I want to SE you, dude. I want to talk about how confident you are about a lot of these beliefs, but unfortunately we're kind of running low on time here, and we have like one more call that I want to get to. Can you like call in again next week or another time so we can talk more about those topics? Because I'd be really interested in that. And if you can't get me there, I have an email. It's truth@atheist-community.org, and I recommend anybody who wants to talk to me or any inquiries about the show, go to that as well. But I do want to talk about this more. I do want to get to some other callers though. But I do appreciate the call, Josh. This was really fun.
All right.
I'm sorry for your loss, Josh. Hang in there.
Yes.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
All right, Josh, you take care. Okay, I know we're kind of on the tail end of the show here, Paul, but we do have one more caller.
We got callers. Let's take them.
Let's take them. Okay, so this is Max in Connecticut, and Max wanted to talk to us about faith healing. And the question I have here is, should parents be prosecuted for, by context of blurring up, should parents be prosecuted for having their children treated with faith healing? This is an interesting topic. Can you elaborate on this a little bit more, Max?
Do you think it falls under freedom of religion if you don't think they should be prosecuted, or? Yeah.
Hot topic. I know Paul probably has an opinion on this.
A couple of things. So first of all, I'm a parent. So I mean, it's anytime you're talking about the health of a child, it means a lot. I also happen to live in a city that has prosecuted different parents for the death of their children for negligence, in terms of they went with homeopathy and faith, not faith healings per se, but they went with, instead of taking them to the doctor, they would pray. It was one set of parents, and another would just chose to try and use homeopathy to cure their children. And I think that was fully justified for our system of law to charge these parents with lack of care. Children are entrusted to parents. Parents have an obligation to children to give them every chance to survive, to be healthy, to live. I think it's inexcusable that anyone can harm another being for their own beliefs. I think that all of our personal freedoms and our religious freedoms stop when it inflicts harm on someone else. So I can't be more emphatic to say, yes, absolutely, parents should be charged for faith healing. Now, that goes to negligence and loss of health. Obviously, I don't think that they should be charged for example, teaching their children that the earth is 6,000 years old. I don't think that is, while I might hyperbolically want to say that that is child abuse in its own way. It's not. It's indoctrinating someone with a bad idea. But anytime you're talking about the actual physical or mental health, then to me, it's pretty black and white. I don't know, Dan, do you disagree?
No, so like I agree with you in spirit. Like I grew up in with parents who practiced medicine, and so I was taken care of pretty well in that regards. And like homeopathy and those kinds of things was just never a thing because I had parents who knew in their practice that these things were kind of BS. And it wasn't until I was older and I figured out that this was a thing that kind of other people did with their kids and stuff. And occasionally I think we all have that one friend that's got the essential oils in their house and, is kind of scenting up the place and stuff. But I've never encountered negligence to the extent of, the death of a child. And unfortunately, like we've been seeing this in the news the past couple of years, and it seems to only be growing, especially with the anti-vaccine movement and stuff. I know Paul definitely has a lot to say about that. I agree with you in that it is negligence. I think what is hard to prove in a court, and again, I'm not an expert on this, is just, can we prove that this person was ignorant on this, or was there a deliberate act of not giving the child what they needed and this adult figure knew that this was what was best for them? Because I think that's kind of harder to prove. If an adult genuinely thinks that this is what's best for their kid and that's what happens, then, I think the legal argument, or there's a distinction there a little bit.
But it's pretty tough if your kid's sick and you don't take them to the doctor at all, and or you are given instructions by a doctor and you throw those out the window. Either way, that's documented in a way, right? Like if you never go to a physician, that's pretty easy to show.
Good point. Well, I guess what I'm thinking in my mind is that they go to a place, but it's not like a real physician. It's one of those kind of sketchy joints and stuff. And, to them, that counts as kind of a, I don't know. Again, we're talking about authority. That counts as an authority in their lives that gives them the legitimacy to continue whatever actions they're doing, whether it's feeding them, I don't know, just pills that don't work, sugar pills or something,
The faith healing ones. The faith healing ones specifically, they usually try and just avoid the doctor altogether.
Yeah.
If that's what you're talking about. Did you have a specific case in mind, Max?
No, not really. But I wanted to go back to the. I just know it's a problem in some states and like counties. I want to go back to what you said about the emotion. Yeah, kind of like Pennsylvania, more rural areas, I believe. I wanted to go back about the emotional aspect. If you, I want to ask if you think if a church, encourages a member to like feel hate or harass another person, like let's say a gay person or a black person, do you think that could be considered a criminal case if like the parent knew what they were doing and causes his child to harass another person?
Yes, that is a hate crime. If we're getting to that level, and we do have some laws against that. Now, interestingly enough, very recently there was, I can't remember what the organization was, but there was an organization that was trying to, I think, there was going to be, was this a Supreme Court decision or this might have been a state decision? I don't remember the details, but basically there was a law that was, like lynching was still kind of a thing in area. I think it was throughout the United States, and they wanted to kind of patch this up and say you can't make a law that says you can't lynch gay people in particular, I think it was, or just like lynching people in general. And there was a organization that was pushing against this idea that still wanted like lynching to be a thing. And this sounds like an event that happened 100 years ago, but this was like within the past few months. I don't remember the details of the organization, but I just remember reading this. This is shocking. I think it definitely does still happen, especially with religious organizations, whether it's subtle or it's overt. The racism, it tends to be more Well, I guess it depends on the denomination. I know, like, for example, like, there's a lot of rhetoric against atheists. I think we could definitely make a case for that. I know that I grew up fearing atheists and thought they was the worst thing ever. And that when you kind of look at it now, it's like, oh, that was definitely, you know, kind of propaganda to some degree. And with gay people as well, we've seen that. To the extent where if you're instructing others to commit acts of violence, yeah, I definitely think that that's something that you could legally try for.
Slightly short of that, we cannot legislate.
Right.
I am a free speech advocate, and so you can't legislate against bad parenting. You can't legislate against bad ideas. All we have to do is encourage the marketplace of ideas so that the bad ideas are seen as bad ideas. Because like most churches, I think, don't advocate hate against gays, but they certainly advocate that is a sinful lifestyle that they chose, right? Just that idea. You're not going to go beat someone up because, oh, you're a sinner and you chose the bad idea. But it does take you into life and your prejudice against people that you shouldn't be, and you have these weird ideas. But I would never advocate that someone's kid should be taken away or like that. Like there's just bad. We're always going to have bad ideas. If we get rid of these religious bad ideas, new bad ideas are going to crop up. We can't. I mean, specifically inciting violence, okay, don't do that. But anything short of that, Dan, I just can't say. I'm too much of a free speech advocate to say you have to have the right to tell people your terrible idea.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, and it's a sad conclusion to come to because it's like we want to do something about it legally. You know what I mean? Like we want to say that this is bad and we want to punish people for doing bad things. But yeah, the free speech stuff, it's hard to argue against, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, and unfortunately, when it's a parent-child situation or a teacher-student, there's a power differential there, and your bad idea is getting accepted at a level it shouldn't. But we can't have the government coming or anyone coming into people's homes and saying you're teaching your kid what you shouldn't. That's just not you can't start. It's a non-starter to me anyway.
Yeah.
If that happens, you're basically no better than the other groups that try to do that. I think at some point, even though you're not preaching, you're telling the right idea, if you're going to invade someone's privacy and tell them that they're wrong, I don't think it makes you any better than the people that you're standing against.
Which is why, for me, more than anything, like I don't even care about teaching evolution in school. I would get rid of all evolution in school if we could replace it with a critical thinking class. If we could have mandatory critical thinking classes, you know, all the way through school.
Okay. I don't know
along
about
with
cutting
personal finance, but
I don't know about cutting the budget on evolution for that. But yeah, I agree.
No, but I'd almost, you know how I feel about evolution, but I'd almost even willing to sacrifice it if we could go with how to be a critical thinker.
I'm with you there. What can we get rid of? Maybe geometry or calculus or something. I'm all right with that.
I wouldn't be sad without geometry.
Yeah. Well, Max, that was an interesting topic to bring up. Thanks for calling. And I hope to hear from you again soon.
Thanks, Max.
Well, folks, I think we're on the tail end of the show now. We're going to try to wrap things up here. But thank you if you're still watching up to now. This is Truth Wanted. This is a show where we talk about what we believe and why. In case you're just joining us within the show, we have a Patreon. It's at patreon.com/truthwanted if you want to support the show there. But definitely subscribe if you haven't already and check us out. We're also on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, all kinds of stuff where you can download the audio form of this show. If you want to get in contact with me, I have an email. It's truth@atheist-community.org. You can find me on there, and if you have any inquiries about the show, like appearances and stuff like that, definitely contact me through there. This is a show made by the Atheist Community of Austin. You can check out some of the other shows that were made on this network, including, but not limited to, Talk Heathen, Atheist Experience, Godless Bitches, all kinds of other stuff on here that's really cool that you should also check out. I think that's all the plugs that I have. Paul, where can people find you at?
Well, the best place is on YouTube at Paulogia, Paulogia, and also on Twitter, Paulogia0, or Facebook as well. But yeah, YouTube is the main place. Go check it out. Check out the channel. See if you like what you see.
Awesome. Now, okay, so I usually don't announce guests ahead of time because, the plans change and things cancel and stuff like that. But I'm really, really excited about next week. And I'm just going to give you guys a hint because when I started Truth Wanted, I wanted it to be as open to conversation as possible. And that means having people on the show that, I don't fundamentally agree with on a lot of things. In case you haven't noticed, I have a lot of atheists on here, which is great. They all have great varying opinions, but I think it's cool to get some stuff from, the other side of the aisle, shall we say. So next week, I'm going to have my very first Christian co-host on this show. This is going to be Craig Reed. Some of you probably know Craig. He's kind of a cool guy. I've had conversations with him before on other platforms, but it'll be interesting. We'll see how that goes. I'm really looking forward to it. I know Paul has talked to Craig before.
Craig is interesting. Yeah, very much.
We'll see how it goes, but definitely check in next week. Fridays at 7 o'clock Central Time for the live stream on that. Paul, do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap it up here?
Always ask, how do you know?
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to describe what I just saw. I think Eric Murphy just pulled his pants down and showed his ass to me. And he's always giving me the middle finger now because I just told that live on air. Haha. Fuck you, Eric. Get wrecked. Anyway, okay. That about wraps it up for this week on Truth Wanted, folks. This has been really, really fun. Always remember to keep wanting the truth, and we'll see you next time. Did you not want me to talk about